Hi, my name is Jenny Lauren Dowden for Conduit News, and today we have Representative Stetson Painter joining us. He is representing the 3rd District of Arkansas, and that is around the Mountain Home area. Hi, Representative. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey Jenny, it's great to be here today, and thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I think we were trying to set up a couple of weeks ago, and just computers and technology
I
just would not
know.
cooperate.
I know. I think it was concerned about some of the, I don't know, some of the questions we may talk about today or ask about, but I think it's going to be a really good interview. I'm so glad that we were able to work it out. I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the legislation that you worked on. I think as I'm looking over the list and some of the things that we were talking about offline, some of these things, really haven't been talked about. I think a lot of our viewers will be interested in knowing about some of these pieces of legislation. So let's just dive right in, if that's okay.
Let's go ahead and get in there.
Okay. First of all, well, before we talk about it, I just want to first get your overall impression of the session. That's kind of the first question that I'm asking all of you guys. Um, Good, bad, just different. Let me know your thoughts.
I thought it was a good session. We tackled a lot of subjects. I think the previous session in 23, we had a couple of big items that just took all the oxygen out of the room, out of the Capitol. And this time around, we had a multitude of different things that we tackled, and I thought it was a good session. Now you have ones and twosies of bad bills out there that we got rid of, but I think overall I would give the session an A.
You had the National Guard package. Of course, you serve. I think that you were, whenever we were first trying to get this interview
I was on
scheduled.
military duty when we were trying to do the interview. We were trying to do that, and so I think some of that
Yeah.
technology problems was probably my fault. So
Well,
yeah.
yeah. So talk to us about this. Why is this a priority, and what is this legislation that you got passed?
So I had the distinct honor to run the National Guard package this session, and it did a lot of different things. We kind of started working on it at the beginning of session, and with our new the first time ever having a joint military and veterans affairs committee. So that was great. So that's where all these bills came through, and some of it dealt with public-private partnerships to help recruiting. We've had some recruiting numbers that are down. And so this is an ability to help the recruiting efforts for our National Guard. We also aligned some stuff we needed to do in the. It's not legislation that will be is I guess famous, but it helps our Guard members to be treated like active duty members when it comes to PXs and exchanges, scholarships. We did $3 million worth of National Guard scholarships this session. We also added the Department of Military for as a critical need because we have firefighters, police, all these folks here that do 24-hour detail, and they need to be treated as critical employees just like the rest of the employees are. And then also a little bit of this HB 15 kind of expanded the National Guard call to be called. It gave a little bit more authority to the governor and the adjutant general, in meaning that currently the governor can only call the National Guard up to active duty during a natural disaster. This changes that to where we do missions all the time around the world, our National Guard does. And so it leaves us with staffing shortages here, whether we're doing court martials, policing, whatever. We can actually ask soldiers now to, if they want to volunteer to come on active duty service for the guard or for the guard and perform their jobs, and then that helps us. That way, we had no shortages. So that way, if a tornado happens, which we're experiencing, seems like every week now,
Yeah.
that we've got men and women that could come up to serve and fill in those positions.
Do you think that with Trump now in office and just the changes that are being made, the emphasis on military, this legislative package, do you think that this will help kind of boost morale, not only nationally, but here in Arkansas as well?
Oh yes, and I can tell you from my experience being in the military, morale is already up. We it's exciting. We're able to do our jobs is to protect our country. Now National Guard recruitment's up too as well. So it's just good to have a commander in chief that knows what the military is supposed to do,
Yeah.
not some social experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to me about HB 1561. I believe that was called the Research and Education Protection Act, and that dealt with higher ed and adversarial countries. Talk to me about that one.
Yes, so that bill makes all our universities, and I want to say our universities were very well to work with. And I told them this is my intent. Let's work together. It's makes them report all these gifts from different countries over a certain amount of monetary threshold. It also increases penalties for IP theft, intellectual property, all this other technology stuff being stolen. A few years ago, we know that there were some Chinese students and professors that stole some ag technology and were heading and got caught at the Little Rock Airport on their way to
Yeah.
Beijing. And so now there's stiffer penalties for students, for professors. They have students from those different countries. They can still come. They have to go through a more difficult background check to make sure they're not a threat or anything else like that. So it really protects Arkansas and our higher ed institutions to make sure we're not, our adversary countries, they don't like us. We're not taking our technology. And Arkansas is leading the way, which doesn't always happen at the all the time. So it's good to have Arkansas number one in this. And actually, we've got other states surrounding, like Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, and so forth, that are asking to copy and model this legislation in their own states. So it's just a good protection for our universities.
Yeah, I think so too. There were several pieces of legislation that kind of dealt with this. Of course, this was a priority of the governor to kind of push back against the CCP and protect Arkansas from foreign adversaries. Talk to us about that priority and why you think it was so important that Arkansas take such a strong stance.
I appreciate the governor taking the stance on that. I think, again, Arkansas was the number one state in leading against anti-China, anti-adversarial countries. Look, we need to protect home. And I think the governor knew that, the legislature knew that. And, there's nothing wrong with working together, but stealing technology, that's a big difference. So remember when the Yetis came out, there's only one Yeti. And then when they moved over there, the China, you have to have a Chinese company over there and the government owns all that. Well, next thing you know, there's 30,000 different Yetis because they
Yeah.
stole the technology. And so, again, don't mind working with folks. And certain bills were just targeted at China. This higher ed bill targeted several countries that don't like the United States. And I'm sorry, if you don't like the United States and what we do, then you can move on and we can move on somewhere else too.
Yeah, I've asked several legislators about this bill whenever they've come on the impressionist session. And so I'm going to ask you, since we're kind of on this topic, it was Senator Johnson's and Representative McKenzie's lobbying bill that dealt with China and Russia specifically, and it passed the House very easily. It could not get through the Senate. What was your thought on that bill?
I thought it was a good bill. Unfortunately, the Senate, in their infinite wisdom, thought it was not, and for whatever reasons they may have. But I thought that was, again, another good bill. Um, I think Representative McKenzie and Senator Johnson worked hard on that. Um, I think it was really a good bipartisan bill
Yeah.
that just, for whatever reason, failed. And I hope they will bring it back in the next legislative session.
Yeah. Okay. I want to know what prompted this one. You introduced House Bill 1006 and it redesignated the 14th Judicial District as a Division A judicial district. What was that bill about?
So beforehand, that judicial district was a B district, which means part-time. So I only had a part-time prosecuting attorney. The prosecuting attorney, David Etheridge, that I talked about, he wanted to go to full-time with the caseload and all that stuff that was happening in that judicial district. He felt that need was there to be full-time, which I think was one of two or three districts only in the state that were part-time left.
Okay.
And so when we wrote that legislation, it made it to a full-time prosecuting attorney, and where it's, again, that affects the citizens. We need a full-time prosecuting attorney to make sure that the bad actors are being held accountable.
You were the majority whip for the House caucus. I think that for anyone who understands politics and you know about whipping the votes, that would be a very interesting position. talk to us about what that was like. What would you say was the most interesting, challenging part of holding that position during session?
Well, I'll tell you, I enjoyed the position, and I
Did you?
first one I did, and I appreciate my colleagues putting their faith and trust in me and letting me handling that important job. I think it's very important. The
Yeah.
whip is not only counting votes, but you're bridging the gaps. You're working with people to maybe, hey, here's your vote. You might want to change this and make your bill a little bit better. You're building those relationships and that dynamic to help somebody get their bill across the finish line. And it was very interesting. Interesting calls that start at 6 a.m. and end at midnight. People wanting to know maybe their count on their bills, um,
Mm.
maybe what the agenda, because as whip, you see the agenda for the next legislative day. It was just very interesting. And you're working with 81 and more personalities on there that, for whatever reason, do not like this bill, may not get along with this member. So you're kind of,
Yeah.
no pun intended, but the conduit
Yeah.
between those members on getting things done. So,
Yeah.
but let's just say sometimes herding cats was a little bit easier than trying to whip some votes. I
I
can tell you.
cannot imagine. I can't.
I think some of the time sometimes the frustrating part, and it's just like any other job, you have good days, you have bad days, but
Sure.
I think one of my frustrations was just trying to get members to tell you where they're going to be at on a vote. I never reported anybody's names, where they're at or whatever. I just did a numeral count. But you have this sense of, oh, I don't know, it's a secret. I've got to keep it until the minute of, where
Hmm.
it was funny because they would do that, but yet they would want their count on their bill. So it was just
Interesting.
interesting to watch. Um,
Yeah.
Most of my colleagues, were great,
Yeah.
work with and everything else. But it's just the whip can be an interesting position that
Yeah.
doesn't always get the lights and the action, but you're in the middle of the sausage being made.
I bet. And it would feel stressful, I think, at times, especially on some of those really important bills that it's a priority of, leadership and their heavy lifts. Was there ever a time when you were watching the board and it lights up, which I do think it could be more fun on the house side just because there's just more activity and the bustling and the board, and not to say I love you guys on the house on the Senate side, but and you see the board light up. Was there ever a time when you were watching the board and then you're like, whoa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a couple of times, and it is stressful, especially on some major pieces of legislation, because you have, maybe the speaker's reaching out to you, maybe the governor's reaching out to you and asking, hey, where were you at on this count and
Yeah.
everything else, and you're still waiting on 25 members to read the bill and respond back to you. It's kind of stressful, but it
Yeah.
is. There was a few like, I thought you told me this, but and visited with those some of the members and they had some different late dynamics and everything else like that, which they can
Yeah.
explain on their own. But it overall, it was a fun job, and
Yeah.
like I said, I was pretty, not to pat myself on the back, but I did not lose a whip count, so I was very
Yeah.
happy about
That's
that.
good. Yeah. What was the heaviest lift?
Oh man, I think I don't want to say anyone specific because there were several that were a heavy lift to do, a priority for those members. I took even the ones that may not have been a priority for the speaker or the governor or the caucus. I took every member that asked me to
Sure.
whip as a heavy priority, so that they wanted to count. I tried to do the best I could to get them that because that's a priority for them.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. A non-answer, but an answer. We'll take it, Painter, I guess.
Right.
What surprises were there, or what caught you off guard during this session that would you say?
Uh, that's a good question. I I think I think a lot of the what caught me by surprise, I guess, this session that we really went after is a lot of city, county, local issues. And maybe for
Mhm.
me, being that maybe it was a surprise for me because it was my first time to be on city county local committee.
Mhm.
And so, coming from a rural area in different, understanding, Northwest Arkansas priorities, what's going on over there, or
Yeah.
here in the bigger cities, which we don't have those kind of problems in rural Arkansas. And
Yeah.
so, understanding that, I think that was the biggest surprise for me is like how many times we're trying to fix things maybe for the local level, and some of that I didn't always agree with. Try to be as local control as we can, but sometimes I didn't think the state should step in. So it's just interesting to see how many local issues that we were dealing with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what did you hear then from your constituents in that rural area? What do you think that they were focused on the most during the session?
I think number one is making sure that, again, just be left alone. If they
Mhm.
want to be able to do things, let the state be out of it. They were focusing on, educational stuff. We have in North Central Arkansas, we have good public schools, but we also have a lot of homeschoolers. And so they were curious about, education, the committee and what was going on there.
Yeah.
They're also concerned about how much either we're spending or here at the state level. And we had some state employees too that reached out. I think overall they were happy with the session. Uh, but I think at the end of the day, they're just, hey, you take care of us, Stetson. We just want the state out of our lives as much as we can. We trust you, but don't do any silly stuff down there. Which there was some silly stuff that went on. But I think overall, that was just it. It's just really, I think they were more targeting on education because we expanded some areas of that. And of course, Learns Act is growing quite a bit. So it was
Yeah.
overall, I think that's what they were happy with.
Yeah.
And it's
Were there,
also a heavy veterans community too as well. So they were happy that we did some veterans issues too as well.
yeah. Were there any pieces of legislation that you supported that didn't make it over the finish line that or that, met a lot of opposition that didn't get passed?
So I ran a bill. So at that time, it was kind of earlier in the session. We didn't know what President Trump was going to do, but there was an EPA mandated that we had to get rid of lead pipes in the state of Arkansas or across the nation, but here in the state of Arkansas, and ran a bill to giving some authority to water agencies and cities that have water districts to maybe do some bonds or whatever they want to do as far as helping folks between the pipe, from the house to the street, taking care of those lead pipes.
Hmm.
Because usually it's from the house to there, it's the owner's responsibility. But in rural Arkansas, people are not going to want to spend money on a lead pipe. They got to afford groceries and that kind of thing. And so to try to meet that mandate, we were going to give them some power to do some bonds. It failed in committee, which I agreed. I understood why the committee didn't want that. We were kind of in that dilemma. What was President Trump going to do? Is he going to rescind that mandate? And I think that decision was going to be as March 30th that he was going to do that. So that was it. That's the only really the bill
Yeah.
that I was just trying to do that failed that I was kind of shocked. But again, it was just to try to take care. But we also were kind of in a dilemma whether feds were going to keep it or not. And if they decided to keep that mandate, we have to do something.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting.
So
A few more questions and then I'll let you go.
no, you're fine.
What would you say is the biggest myth that or misconception that people have about the legislature?
That we're all rich. uh, you know,
What? The per diem is not good enough for you guys? No, I'm just
no,
kidding.
no, no, no. I think too is it's the fullest part-time job you will ever
Mm,
have. Just because we're out of session doesn't mean we're not responding to constituents, doing all this other work, fighting for our Kansans. We are. For me, I receive, in session a lot of calls, but out of session, probably 5 to 6 calls a week with constituents needing help, whether from veterans issues to Social Security to, hey, DMB was giving me a runaround to renew my trailer or whatever.
Yeah.
and our car, and we help those issues. Or you have a struggling single parent that, their SNAP benefits for whatever reason got
Yeah.
disconnected or lost, and it was a glitch in the system. And so to help them out. So it's a variety of issues. And then, of
Yeah.
course, being an ALC, we continue to meet during the interim, which is very crucial. So I think it's the most powerful committee in the legislature. And because
Yeah.
we can approve contracts, we can approve all kinds of different things, rules for all the legislation that we just passed. All the rulemaking comes through there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about ALC, but to your point, my family member was a legislator for 30 years. Of course, this was before term limits, but you are right. You are not just a representative during that short interim of session. People look to you all to be their representative
Mm-hmm.
for that whole time, and you do get phone calls nonstop, even outside of session. So I completely understand what you are saying. But then also to your point, ALC, that just kicked off this week. And you're right. Also, very powerful committee was watching session or the committees yesterday. A lot of discussion yesterday in it was one of the subcommittees and just regarding some grants. And of course, I love Representative Kavanaugh that she's on there because, she digs into it and she's like, okay, well, we're going to approve the funding, for the startup the first year, but then how is it going to be funded for the subsequent years? And they're like,
Right.
oh, yes, that's an excellent question. We'll get back to you.
And
Like,
that's
oh
and
gosh.
she's the co-chair of the review, and I'm vice co-chair of that. And it's an honor to serve with her and represent the House on that. And
Yeah.
yeah, we just that's again trying to be good stewards of the taxpayer money. And these
Yeah.
agencies got to come here and say, hey, this is what we're doing. And if I could tell you, if there is not a good answer,
Yeah.
many members in this legislature, including Chairwoman Kavanaugh, will jump all
Yeah.
over that. And
Yeah.
we had a couple of those yesterday, just one couple of those issues, and that's part of the legislative authority,
Yeah.
part of the
And that
process.
we appreciate that. Just asking the good questions, being responsible with the taxpayer dollars. Um, okay, one other question. Who would you say is um, one of the most effective legislators? Either let's just only stick to the House. Who's one of the most effective legislators there in the House?
I'm
Besides
going
you,
to
you can't say
I,
yourself.
No, I think there's quite a few that are effective, and I want to say a group of
Okay.
effective members, and they're from my neck of the woods, and that's going to be Representative Bart Schultz, Representative Jeremy Woolridge, Representative Trey Stommel, Representative Shad Pierce. Um, I think those four individuals working with them are very effective. They're in my class. They came in at the same time with me, but I think they're very effective. Watching them, uh, you know, work with senior members and freshman members, and just the way we've been effective to even hold some votes. Even during when we were freshmen, we were able to hold some votes on some funding for certain
Yeah.
things. They were effective. What I like about them, they're always above board. You get what you see. They're honest. They give you their word. Their word they will is perfect. And so watching those, I think they were pretty good.
All right. Primary season, we're in it. Endorsements are rolling out. Reelection
Yeah.
campaigns are starting. Your intentions or ambition, have you announced yet, or what's next?
I haven't announced yet, but my full intention is to seek another term and represent the people of District 3. And if they decide I'm doing a good job and give me the honor to represent them again, I'd greatly appreciate that. It's been, outside of being a dad and being a husband and being a born again believer, serving in the legislature has been the highest honor of my life. And it just to fight for people to whether it's legislation or a constituent call you and say thank you, or it's just an honor. And it's not many Arkansans get to work and call the Capitol the workplace. And so it I every time I go to the Capitol, I lose a breath for a little bit just because I have the distinct privilege to work there.
Well, it is beautiful and it is an honor. And we're excited that you announced here on Conduit. So we'll be sure to
Yes,
tell our viewers.
there you
You
go.
know,
There you go.
it'll be an interesting primary season. It'll be one to watch, I think. And it sounds like there's some activity kind of around in your district to pay
There
attention to.
there is, in the Northeast area up there, it is. Actually, being in leadership, I'm working on a spreadsheet right now of all members who are coming back and who are not, and folks that have announced on that. So it's going to be an interesting season,
Yeah.
primary season, and I just hope folks do your research on your candidates, ask questions, and then vote for the person you think will best represent you.
Well, Representative Painter, thank you so much for coming on Conduit. Really enjoyed this conversation and your insight, and hope that you come back on again soon, especially once we get into the primaries. You can come back and talk about your campaign.
Yes, ma'am, and I greatly appreciate you guys. I follow you guys on all the social media, read the stuff that you guys put out, and just appreciate you trying to inform voters across the state. Appreciate what you do, and thanks for having me. And let's do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.